No one remembered their awakening. That was the strange part. People remembered the moment after the flash of heat under their skin, the sudden clarity in their mind, the quiet realization that something ancient had finally stirred away. But the exact instant when the power ignited inside them, that memory always slipped through their fingers like water. Maybe it was because the awakenings were never sudden. They were the end of a long, invisible process that began at birth. Every child entered the world carrying a silent imprintessy of power etched into blood, bone, and soul. It slept there, waiting, watching, growing with them. But until the body reached its full strength and the mind its full shape, the power remained dormant, coiled patiently beneath the surface. Most people awakened between 18 and 21. It was the age when bones stopped lengthening, when emotions steadied, when the chaotic storms of adolescence finally quieted. Healers said it was the body's maturity that triggered the awakening. Scholars insisted it was the brain. Spiritualists swore it was the soul, finding its true alignment at last. Whatever the reason, when the awakening came, the gift of one's ancestors rose with it. Families prepared their children for it. Clans taught their youth to breathe with control. Everyone expected to inherit the same type of power carried through their bloodline. Everyone knew what was coming, except for the ones who didn't. Because once in many thousands, someone awakened twice. At first came the inherited power, familiar and predictable. But then days, weeks, sometimes months later something else emerged. Something that didn't belong to their lineage, their blood, or any known category of human ability. A second power. Wild. Uncharted. Impossible. These individuals were called variants. Their energy was different, untamed, unstable, brilliant in a way that frightened even the most experienced scholars. Variants defied logic. They defied genetics. And sometimes, without warning, their awakening tore open pathways that should never exist at all. Some whispered that variants were mistakes of nature. Others believed they were evolution. And a few feared they were the first signs that the fabric of their world was starting to fray. But for most people, the truth was far simpler. The awakening was the moment life truly began. Power defined everything. From the moment a child was born, their future was quietly shaped by the strength that slept inside them. Lineage determined reputation, influence, even the opportunities one could reach for. And once their awakening arrived, the truth of who they were and who they could become was revealed. Some awakened with the predictable flames of their ancestors. Others with the coming clarity of healers, or the sharp senses of the sight-born, or the shifting grace of windwalkers. These inherited abilities were called lineage powers, and they formed the backbone of society. Entire families were known by the abilities that marked their bloodlines. But sometimes two lineages collided: fire and water, earth and wind, light and shadow, and the children of such unions awakened with strange, unexpected fusions of power. These were called hybrids, not as trusted as pure lineages, but respected for their versatility. A hybrid's future was uncertain, and uncertainty, in the awakened realms, was both thrilling and dangerous. Rarer still were the variants, those whose awakening came twice. Their second ability arrived unpredictably, weeks or months after the first, and always with an energy that felt wild and disobedient. Their powers did not come from blood or ancestry. They came from something else entirely. Scholars called variants anomalies of nature. The fearful called them omens. The council called them threats that must be contained. Because variants defied the laws the world depended upon, and nothing unsettled the powerful more than the idea that the system itself could be broken. Because of this, the world ranged itself round power. Hills rose first, loose coalitions of powered individuals whose abilities complemented one another, healers working with shield bearers, seers paired with trackers, elementals grouped for larger tasks. From these grew the academies, institutions dedicated to preparing the unawakened youth to use whatever abilities would one day spark within them. Above them all stood the governing order, a council composed of those with the most stable and long-standing hereditary powers. Their authority wasn't absolute, but it guided most of the world's balance. Rarely did they have reason to fear disruption after all. The system had worked for generations. The first time Kale turned the air into water, he was 16. It happened in the cramped kitchen of their modest home, a place that always smelled faintly of warm herbs and river stone, the signature sense of his mother's craft. She had been showing him, patiently as ever, how to coax the moisture in the air into a single shimmering drop. It was a skill she herself could perform only after years of discipline and strain. Just breathe with it, she had said, her fingers resting lightly on his wrist. Water responds to calm minds, not hurried hands. Cale nodded, exhaled, and felt something. A readiness, a quiet rush under his skin, as if the world were full of invisible threads waiting to be pulled. In the space of a heartbeat, the air round his pump condensed into a swirl of liquid, not a drop, not even the modest pool his mother sometimes managed on her best days, but a full glass's worth that splashed onto their worn wooden table. His mother froze, her eyes widening in stunned disbelief as the water rolled in obedient circles round his fingers. Cale, she whispered, stepping back as though he had suddenly become someone else entirely. You awakened. He didn't understand at first. Awakenings were supposed to happen between 18 and 21, not at 16. Not like this. From that day onward, the house changed. Curtains stayed shut. His mother hurried him inside when neighbors passed. Lessons became quieter, more urgent. And every time he practiced, her eyes carried equal parts pride and fear. Water manipulation wasn't rare. Families across their region carried some variation of it: temperature shifts, moisture gathering, subtle liquid shaping. But Cale's abilities were something else. Where his mother struggled for minutes to coax a glass of water out of dry air, Cale did it without thinking. Where most water controllers merely warmed or cooled, Cale could freeze droplets midair or boil them into vapor with a flick of his hand. And worst of all, he didn't seem to understand how extraordinary any of it was. You cannot show this to anyone, his mother warned him each night, her voice trembling despite her attempt at calm. They will take you away to examine you, to own you. Early awakening is rare. Cale, unusually strong awakening, that's something the order will never ignore. So Cale stayed hidden. A well-to-do boy from a respected but unremarkable family. Polite, quiet, raised by a single mother who worked long hours yet always found time to teach him discipline and kindness. To the world, he was just another youth waiting for his someday awakening. But beneath that calm exterior, the truth was gathering, deep and steady like an ocean tide. And Cale had no idea that this was only his first power. Cale grew into his abilities the way other boys grew into their height, quietly, almost reluctantly. He was the kind of young man who apologized when others bumped into him, who held doors open even when he wasn't sure anyone was coming through. There was a softness to him that people tended to underestimate, mistaking gentleness for meekness. But his mother knew better. She saw the way he stayed awake on nights she returned late, pretending to be studying so she wouldn't feel guilty. She noticed how he always saved the sweeter half of his dinner for her, even though he thought she didn't know. And she felt the steady patience in him, like deep, still water trait her own mother used to say only true water-bearers possess. Their home was modest but warm, kept running by his mother's work at the local archives. She was a woman of quiet strength, with long hair tied in simple braids and hands calloused from years of shaping water into whatever her job demanded: preservation, restoration, cleaning. She talked little, but when she did, her words held weight. Her rules for Kale were simple: stay disciplined, stay careful, stay hidden. She taught him breathing forms every morning, gentle movements that matched the rhythm of flowing streams, and in the evenings she made him practice shaping water droplets the size of pearls. She never praised him too loudly. Fear sat too heavily in her chest for that. Still, in the moments she forgot to guard her expression, Cale would catch her looking at him with eyes that shone with unspoken pride. Those were the moments he held closest. It happened during training day in the village square, where all the youths of his age group gathered to practice basic combat forms under the watchful eyes of volunteer instructors. Cale hated training days. Not because he disliked the drills, but because they required precision, and precision meant restraint. He had spent years perfecting the art of pretending to be average. On this particular afternoon, the sun beat down hard, and the air felt thick. The water barrels placed round the yard for basic temperature manipulation exercises were half empty. Most students struggled to even draw moisture from them. Hale stood at his station, hands hovering above the barrel, mimicking the hesitant posture he had practiced for months. The instructor walked behind the line of students, booming encouragements. Steady your breath, connect with the water, don't force it. To his left, a boy grunted as he managed to lift a thin ribbon of water barely thicker than a string. The instructor praised him, the group murmured approvingly. Cale pretended to struggle. He furrowed his brow, took slow breaths, let his hands shake ever so slightly. Only when the instructor turned his attention elsewhere did he allow a thin layer of water to rise, slow, uneven, entirely unfreeing. He even made sure drops fell back into the barrel as though his control wavered. No one noticed. No one ever did. But as he lowered his hands, satisfied he had blended perfectly into the group, a sharp gasp echoed behind him. He turned. A young Galera, one of the Hiller apprentices, was staring not at him, but at the stone path under his feet. A trail of frost glimmered there, faint and already melting. Cale's heart lurched. He had been so focused on faking weakness with the barrel that he hadn't realized moisture from the air had gathered unconsciously round him, tiny droplets freezing with each party before lifting in wisps of vapor as he calmed. Lyra blinked and stepped back. "Did it?" Cale forced a laugh. "Just spilled some water, I think. It's nothing." She frowned. "But it looked like—" One of the instructors called her name sharply, and she turned away. By the time her attention returned to him, the frost had vanished completely. But Cale felt the weight of her suspicion all the way home. That night he confessed everything to his mother, every frozen droplet, every near slip, every flicker of control he could not fully suppress. She listened in silence, then placed both hands on his cheeks. "Cale," she whispered, fear tightening her voice. "You have to be more careful. Much more. The stronger your power gets, the closer we are to losing everything." For the first time, Cale understood that hiding wasn't just protection. It was survival. The second awakening. It began months after his first awakening, on a night when the world felt too quiet. Cale lay awake long after his mother had gone to bed, staring at the wavering shadows on his ceiling. His water abilities had only grown stronger, too strong. To Ibran, no amount of breathing forms could tame the surge beneath his skin. Every day felt like balancing on a thin sheet of ice, afraid of the moment it might crack. That night, it finally did. A sharp pressure built behind his eyes, like a storm trying to punch its way out of his skull. He sat upright, clutching his temples, but the world only tilted more violently. The air round him seemed to bend, warping like heated glass. And then he wasn't in his room anymore. The bed, the walls, the dim lantern, like everything shattered in a silent burst of white. Cale found himself standing barefoot on damp grass under a sky the color of molten gold. He gasped. The air tasted sweet. Warm wind rustled strange, luminous plants that pulsed lightly as if breathing. Far in the distance, mountains floated, actual mountains, drifting lazily like clouds. For a moment he could only stand there, heart pounding, stunned into stillness. "What is this?" he whispered. The world trembled again, edges flickering, and before he could gather another breath, he was yanked back, sucked through a sudden tear of rippling blue light, and dropped ungracefully onto the floor of his own room. He hit the wooden boards with the choked exhale. Silence. Then the pain vanished. The pressure dissolved. And he lay trembling, realizing with a terrible, wonderful certainty. He had awakened again. Not inherited. Neff learned. Something else entirely. Over the next days, Cale tested the strange ability in secret. The portals came like instinct, raw, unrefined. When he focused on the strange pull inside him, space thinned, folded, and peeled open like a griffin drawn aside. The first time he deliberately opened a portal, he stepped into a world drowned in endless rain. Thick black clouds choked the sky, lightning branching like white cracks. Ruined towers jutted from a flooded landscape. There were voices in the distance, echoes of people who had once lived there, or something that mimicked them. He didn't stay long. The second world was a sunlit desert with crystalline sand that hummed beneath his feet. Giant shadowy figures moved far across the dunes, slow and ancient. When one turned its head as if sensing him, Cale fled back through the tear of light. The third world was abandoned entirely. A silent forest of gray stone trees. No wind. No animals. No sky, only a blanket of dim silver light covering everything like dust. Cale walked for minutes, maybe hours, but nothing stirred. It felt as though time itself had died here. Not all dimensions were dangerous. Some were breathtaking. He found a realm where rivers flowed upward, spiraling into glowing clouds like ribbons of blue silk. Another where winged people soared over gleaming seas. In one, children shaped tiny stars with their bare hands, laughing as they tossed them like glitter. Each discovery was intoxicating, terrifying, beautiful. And Cale could feel the power in him growing, his reach expanding, his portals stabilizing, his visions sharpening. But he also felt something else. Every time he opened a path to another dimension, a thin thread of cold swept up his spine, a whisper of imbalance. As if somewhere, deep behind the fabric of reality, something had noticed him. He told no one, not even his mother. How could he? Early awakening alone would have put him under the world's microscope. A variant awakening dimension travel would have turned him from a curious anomaly into a living weapon, a research subject, a threat. So he hid it. He swallowed the wonder, the fear, the dizzying freedom of stepping into countless worlds. He practiced at dawn, behind locked doors, with blankets pinned across windows. He kept the portals small, precise, silent. But even then, his mother sensed something changing in him. She watched him with worried eyes, noticing the exhaustion he tried to hide, the distant look he carried, the nights he didn't sleep. She didn't ask. She didn't press. But she hovered, as though afraid he would vanish if she looked away. Cale wished he could promise her he wouldn't. But with each passing day, the pull toward the beyond grew stronger. A call, a summons, a destiny he had never asked for. And somewhere in the infinite tangle of dimensions he glimpsed, there was one world that felt different. Close. Familiar, though he had never seen it. Our world. He didn't know it yet. But soon, one wrong step or one desperate choice would drag him into it. His first arrival on Earth. It happened without intention. Cale had opened dozens of portals, by then controlled, deliberate, each one anchored carefully to avoid collapsing behind him. But on that particular night, exhaustion tugged at him. He had pushed too far, traveled too often, stretched his new power to its finest edges. And in that thin, trembling state between sleep and awareness, the pull came. Soft, insistent, different. The fabric of space rippled before him, forming a tear that glowed not with the usual silver or blue, but with the gentle, warm light. It hummed like a heartbeat. Cale didn't resist. He stepped through. Stepping into Earth, the world on the other side hit him with noise. So many voices, so many minds. A chaotic swell of motion and light and scent. Cale staggered, instinctively pulling a veil of invisibility round himself, not a true invisibility, but a subtle bending of perception, something he'd learned from a dimension where creatures survived by being unseen. He landed on a hard surface, smooth, warm, slightly dusty. The roof up. When he lifted his head, his breath caught. The skyline before him was a forest of metal and glass, stretching endlessly into the night. Lights flickered from thousands of windows. Machines roared along black roads far below. Somewhere, music played. Somewhere else, sirens wailed. But what struck Cale most was the sky. Clear, open, vast, a soft blue-black spatter with stars that looked exactly the same as in his world. How can that be? He whispered, but the wind carried his words away. Below him, people hurried along sidewalks, staring at glowing rectangles in their hands. Cars streamed through intersections like metallic rivers. Laughter burst from a group of teenagers. A woman argued loudly on a device Cale could not begin to understand. A child cried. A couple kissed under a street lamp. The world was ordinary, beautifully, overwhelmingly ordinary, and utterly power silent. Cale closed his eyes, trying to sense even a flicker of energy or shaping, heat bending, mind within, any of the dozens of talents common in his own world. Nothing. Not a trace. This world had no awakening, no power, no dimensional awareness. Its people lived blind to the infinite dimensions surrounding them. And yet they moved with such confidence, with no fear of being taken, tested, or watched by powerful orders. They built tall structures without elemental supports. They traveled without teleportation. They communicated without telepathy. They survived on ingenuity alone. Cale felt something twist in his chest, admiration, and a strange kind of sorrow. A quiet exploration. He descended from the rooftop with practice ease, shaping water vapor into footholds only he could sense. On the streets, he moved unseen, walking beside humans who unknowingly brushed past him. He listened to conversations, watched vendors close up their stalls, followed the scent of spices to a small restaurant buzzing with laughter, studied the bright screens displaying worlds within world stories, news, entertainment. This place was loud, messy, unpredictable, and it felt alive in a way the word structure of his own society never had. Cale found himself lingering, fascinated by simple human things: a stray dog curled under a bench, the warmth spilling from a bakery, the hum of electricity like quiet magic. He wondered how long he could stay. A day, a night, longer. But the whisper came again, a tug at his spine, the call of home. His portals never stayed stable for long enough in worlds without compatible energy. And the one he felt now was thinning, threatening to close entirely. Cale exhaled, casting one last look at the glowing city sprawled beneath him. "I'll come back," he murmured. I promise." With the sweep of his hand, he tore open a small, silent portal behind a billboard. The air rippled, folding into a sliver of brilliance. He stepped through, unseen, unknown, untouched, and the world swallowed the light as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Cale returned to his room before dawn, the portal closing softly behind him. No one in his world knew he had gone. No one in our world knew he had arrived. But the path between the two had been opened, and it would not stay closed for long.